let's talk cars. You may be noticing a rather sad trend, not just in America, but in the world. Saloon cars, or sedans as they're referred to in America, are kind of disappearing on the roads. You see a lot of late model ones, but new models, a lot of car makers aren't making them anymore. They don't really exist. I mean, sure, you're going to have your classics like your Toyota Corollas and your Honda Civics and the Accord, maybe. Most of the Americans and a lot of the European car companies, they've given up on the saloon car. They've switched over to SUVs for the most part. In recent years, been apparently large global demand for something like that. But yeah, the American saloon car has sort of died, and nobody really talked about it. Bart's Car Stories has got a fun little video on this. Let's take a look.
If I were to run into you in the 1970s, if you're old enough to remember those days, I mean, I'm not, so I would have to time travel, but anyways, if I walked up to you or say anybody working at an American dealership, and I just casually show you what an American car dealership will look like today in 2025, you would be appalled. You know, the bright future of the automotive industry, no flying cars, just ugly blobs. I mean,
Yeah, SUVs and trucks.
here's an example of Ford's sedan lineup for 1975. Just look at these cars. So many sedans. Here's a dealer brochure from the same year. You know, Ford through the 60s and even
Ford LTD.
here's a dealer brochure.
I believe this was also sold as the Lincoln Continental. I recognize the shape and especially the folding headlamps.
Brochure from the same year. You know, Ford through the 60s and even the 70s really did have an amazing selection of sedans. Now, would you like to see what
Beautiful
Ford has to
cars.
offer for sedans today? Let me just pull it up really quick. Oh yeah, there are none. What about
No, there are no saloon cars available anymore from Ford. Anything close to resembling a car, you have the Mustang. That's it. Just the Mustang.
Chrysler? Surely Chrysler, the sedan company, the company that built their entire business on making
This was back when they built large automobiles that were called land yachts. And you get inside, and the seats are just so plush. It's like you're sitting in living room furniture as you drive along the road.
quality cars for regular people. Surely they have some cars, right? Nope, just
Nope.
a van.
Yeah, that's all that's left of the Chrysler lineup. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, over in Europe, they were selling these as Lancias. I think they've stopped, though. I don't even think that... Those of you... Euro bros, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Fiat and Lancia really have much of a presence anymore, aside from a few odd compact SUVs. I don't even know if the 500 is still being sold anymore. I think they finally gave up trying to do battle against Mini and just sort of admitted defeat, which is sad because if there was one car that could give the Mini Cooper a run for its money, it would have been the Fiat 500. But yeah, this is all Chrysler has to offer, whereas used to, they had vans, people carriers, as they're sometimes referred to. They had at least one or two SUVs, and then they had the Chrysler 300. Which I drove one of those as a rental one time when I was having my car worked on, and it was nice. Almost considered buying it, but would have been a bit too big for the garage.
Literally just a van. What about GM? I mean, throughout history, nope, just
Hang
a
on.
van.
I'm just now noticing the prices too. 43 grand for a van. 52 for a plug-in hybrid. That is daylight robbery. That is unbelievable. No thinking person would ever pay that much for a Chrysler minivan. It's awful. Shame on them for even daring to put that out.
Literally just a van. What about GM? I mean, throughout history, GM arguably has had some of the best and most varied sedan offerings, right? Let's look at GM's sedan options today. Literally the Cadillac CT. That's it.
Yeah. I don't think they even make the XTS anymore, which was supposed to be a middle ground between what was left between the DeVille and Seville. Both were just iconic American luxury cars. And then they got merged into the XTS, and that became the modern day DeVille. The CTS got promoted up to the Seville category, and then they had the ATS, which was so small that there was zero legroom in the back for anyone. Especially if you had fat Americans buying that car, you're not fitting anyone, not even small children, in that back seat.
Buicks are all SUVs and only...
I actually looked at a Buick when I was shopping for a new car. I was even looking at an Invista. Test drove one. It's not bad. It's not American. It's made in Korea. The rest of these, I don't even know where they come from. Don't even know if I want to know. Certainly not Detroit.
Only SUVs. Chevys are only SUVs and trucks, and also the Corvette. How did we get to this point? Why?
Yeah, if you want anything resembling a car, you have to get a Corvette.
Why did the American sedan, this icon of American motoring, why did it die such a sudden and tragic death? Let's find out. Now, before we get too far, though, I want to show you guys something that has genuinely impressed me. This is the Red Tiger F17 Elite, the world's first full night color dash cam with in-cabin view. I've been testing it out, and this thing captures crystal clear, full color footage inside the car, even at night under streetlights. Perfect if you do a lot of city or late night driving. The front camera records in stunning 4K, paired with the Sony Starvis 2 sensors front and rear, so you can actually zoom in and read license plates clearly within about 5 meters, even in mixed light. It's a full 3-channel setup,
to you, New
front,
Jersey
rear, and
Hyundai
inside,
Tucson
all balanced
driver.
with HDR, which means no blown out headlights or dark corners. For me, it's important with this kind of product that it's just usable and friendly, and you can tell that Red Tiger have worked really hard in this area. What's great with the F17 Elite is this quality touchscreen, making it so that you have all these built-in features and they're easy to access. You can do things like adjust the resolution or turn on and off features like voice control or switch to different modes. It's really nice and really quality. Plus, with Wi-Fi 6, you guys can check it out using the link in the description and also grab it with my exclusive discount code. Big thanks to Red Tiger for sponsoring this video, and let's dive in. In the early years of the automobile, most vehicles were these kind of open top runabouts and touring cars. They were
horseless carriages. This was the remnants of the horseless carriage.
Simple, exposed machines, and in terms of protection from the elements, they didn't really offer much.
No. I mean, you had something like that, but it got awfully stuffy after a while because no aircon, no heater, no climate control, which is why everything was kept open air and sometimes open top.
As driving became more common and also as roads improved, automakers started to experiment with enclosed bodies that shielded passengers from wind and rain and dust. These enclosed designs evolved into what became known as sedans, and that term was actually borrowed from horse-drawn carriages that had similar enclosed compartments. By the 1910s and 1920s, the sedan really represented a new direction for American car design. Manufacturers had started to focus on things like comfort and refinement and also safety. And so enclosed cabins really gave drivers privacy. And also on top of this, advances in heating and upholstery really made these cars just more pleasant for long distance drives, which was important because they were becoming reliable enough to actually take on occasional road trips. The sedan really became a symbol of progress and sophistication, an indicator that cars were no longer just for hobbyists or for the wealthy, but built for everyday families.
We have the Ford Motor Company to thank for that in the most part. Henry Ford being the visionary, going against the grain at the time, where people thought cars should be reserved for the elites and for the wealthy, people who could afford them. Henry Ford just said, you know what? I'm going to make it affordable for everyone, especially my workers. I'm going to pay them a livable wage, so much so that they can actually afford to buy my car, and then they will practically do the advertising and sales for me. Brilliant concept, and it brought motoring to the general public.
As mass production took hold, this shift away from these carriage-like designs to the sedan was really cemented. Ford's Model A, introduced in 27, and also Chevy's Master Series in the 30s, brought the sedan body style to the general public. These models had steel roofs, roll-up windows, and reliable engines at prices that the average American family could afford. As ownership spread, the sedan came to represent not only transportation, but also upward mobility, a family's move toward, stability and success. By the 1930s, the sedan had become the default shape of the American automobile and the foundation of what would become decades of domestic car culture. After World War II, the American automobile industry really entered its heyday. The 50s and 60s were all about rapid economic growth, suburban expansion, and of course, this was all also tied to the construction of the interstate highway system. During this era, the sedan became the default vehicle for the American family, a practical...
Look at that, swivel seats. Just sort of sit down and swivel your way into the car. That's brilliant.
Comfortable and stylish way to navigate this new and exciting suburban landscape. Design took center stage as automakers competed to capture the optimism of this age. The 50s brought sweeping tail fins, heavy chrome trim, and jet-inspired styling to the sedan. This era really reflected the country's fascination with space and technology and just this hopeful, futuristic spirit.
And that's the key with the design, hopeful. Really optimistic, hopeful design. Something that's looking forward and looking upward. And you don't really get that with the modern design for a lot of cars, unfortunately. You're coming close with some car companies opting to do sort of I guess you could call it a retro future design. You've seen a lot of it with Hyundai. They're trying to think of which particular models. I know that they did a concept car. It was based off their old design for the Grandeur, but it's been kitted out with all LED headlamps and tail lamps. Very futuristic interior that is also, in some ways, a bit retro because it almost has this kind of crushed red velvet velour type carpeting and trim in some spots. And then these strange-looking bucket seats that almost looks like you're dealing with a corset or something. It looks like a corset from the back. But the shape of the Grandeur concept, very boxy, a lot like old cars from the 80s. So it's an interesting blend of old and new. Bit of the past, but a lot of futurism as well. You see that with the Hyundai Santa Fe model. That one in particular, to me, looks like an old Land Rover with pixelated headlamps and tail lamps. And it also looks a lot slimmer too. Not as fat as the old Santa Fe models. Which I don't know. That's not so bad, but definitely needs... We've got to get back to more optimistic, hopeful sort of designs. Because some cars, they just look so dreary. Or they look like children's toys, or some of them still look like kitchen appliances.
60s designs grew cleaner and a little more simple and formal, but they also got bigger and more powerful and also more luxurious. It is true that in many ways, cars peaked in terms of performance and reliability in the 90s, but it's hard to deny that in terms of design and styling, cars probably peaked in the 60s. And sedans of this period, they were really like rolling architecture, built not just for transportation, but as statements of your own personal success and your own identity. The big three automakers, that is GM, Ford, and Chrysler, dominated the market, and they structured their brands around these clear sedan hierarchies. Chevy, Ford, and Dodge offered entry-level family sedans, Buick, Mercury, and Chrysler kind of served the mid-range, and then Cadillac, Lincoln rested at the top tier of American luxury. This tiered system made it so that pretty much every household could find a sedan that matched their income and their aspirations, but
most of it was just, you had different models that would just, it'd be the same basic shape, platform, framing, and everything, but what would separate it is the badging, the color scheme, and the trim, especially on the interior.
These were all vehicles that a person could be proud to own. In American culture, the sedan became a symbol of stability and success. It was dad's car, it was the family car, often the company car, a fixture of driveways and highways and office parks.
God, back when we actually had proper company cars. Does anyone remember company cars? Nowadays, almost all companies, they just expect you to use your own personal vehicle. And then they never reimburse you for any expenses, or maybe they do if you're lucky. That really shows you sort of economic malaise that we are in when you don't even have things like company cars or things like expense accounts. These sort of little baubles and trappings of luxury that you could enjoy with a proper, stable job in America, in the United Kingdom, Western European countries. All of that's gone now. And working for such companies is now just absolute misery. Work in general is just starting to become such a miserable experience. Because, as we've alluded to previously, companies aren't being allowed to fail. Stock market's not allowed to have a bad day, because that could hurt the boomers' retirement accounts.
Parking lots across the country. Models like the Bel Air and the Galaxy, the Chrysler New Yorker, the Cadillac Fleetwood.
Damn, look at that Cadillac.
The Bel Air and the Galaxy.
Ford Galaxy. Now, there's a lovely car. In the early days of NASCAR, they would kit these out and use them as race cars.
The Chrysler New Yorker, the Cadillac Fleetwood.
Look at that. Look at that interior chart. That plush velour interior, especially that back seat. It looks like a sofa in the back there. Driver and passenger seat. It looks like you're sitting in a lazy boy recliner, but like a classy one, not a trashy looking one. It actually looks like you're stepping into a really comfortable, almost like one of those sunken living rooms that were quite popular back then. And this car is it looks massive in the photographs, and it is massive in person. Fleetwood was the flagship, I believe, of the Cadillac lineup for a long time. You had a Cadillac Fleetwood. You had mucho dinero there. Funny you should mention that. NASCAR had to change their rules since American car companies don't make sedans anymore. Yes, I think sometime around the 2000s they started letting in the Japanese to race their cars, but that was only because there was a rule saying they had to be a car brand or a particular car lineup that was built in America or assembled at least partly in America. So that's how you were able to start seeing, I think, Toyota Camrys racing in NASCAR. Memory's a bit fuzzy on that. Used to be a rule it had to be a model they actually made in order to race, yeah. And nowadays, it doesn't have to be a model you make. Then again, cars in NASCAR, very little resemblance whatsoever for a long time to actual production models. Maybe the frame, but the rest of it is all just fiberglass body, and that's about it. So really stretching the rules for a long time.
These sedans really defined this era. They were a picture of post-war confidence and really the embodiment of the American dream on four wheels, and then it all went to crap. By the early 1970s, the dominance of the American sedan really began to weaken. The decade opened with big, powerful cars that still reflected the optimism of the previous era, but this confidence was short-lived. The 1973 oil crisis exposed a major flaw in Detroit's approach. Most American sedans were large, heavy, and really fuel-hungry. And
yeah, I think I remember a family member telling me about a car that they drove. This was in late 60s, early 1970s. American car, an American muscle car at that. I think it was a Dodge. And they noticed that as the car was idling, at an intersection or something like that, waiting for a traffic signal to change, the fuel gauge would just slowly start to tick down towards empty. I think they were having to fuel up on the daily. It was like either going to work or going home, had to stop at petrol station. That is how thirsty a lot of old American cars were. A lot of cars in general. Fuel economy did not really become a thing until the oil crisis in the early 70s.
As gasoline prices spiked and shortages hit across the country, the full-size family car suddenly started to feel like a burden instead of a necessity. This period became known as the malaise era, just kind of a word used to describe negativity. American sedans were slowly used to describe negativity.
Now that right there, nothing malaise era about that. That right there, chat, in front. That was the pagoda version of the Mercedes-Benz SL. About 10 years ago, these cars could be sold practically for a song, in good condition. Now, six-figure collector's items. And the following generation, the R107, is quickly getting up there in price. Decent models with some mileage on them. 10, 15 years ago, you could have gotten them for about, I don't know, 15, 20 grand, something like that. Really good models, 30 grand. Now, I think at last check, I think they were climbing towards 40 or 50 grand, which doesn't surprise me in the least. Beautiful old cars. And yeah, I'd drive the hell out of one of these. It's just, chef's kiss, perfection.
Negativity. American sedans were slowly getting bloated and inefficient. Stricter emissions and safety regulations cut performance, and the cars added weight and complexity, and this really hurt handling and performance and even reliability even more. The result was a generation of vehicles that looked big but were really underpowered and outdated, because at the same time, Japanese manufacturers started to get...
I mean, for the most part, it's all they could do. But all they knew how to do was just... They wanted to make things safer? Okay. Make it bigger and bulkier. Put as much space between the actual crash and the people, the point of crash and the people inside the car. Emissions tightening? Okay. Make the engine smaller and weaker. Whereas, as we're about to see here, Japanese said, no, you know what? You can build it smaller and lighter, and that way you don't have to put a big engine in it and go fast. And you can still make it safe.
A foothold in the American market with a very different formula for the sedan. Compact, efficient, and reliable cars from the likes of Toyota, think the Corolla, but also Honda's Accord. The Datsun 510 proved that smaller cars could be better. These cars started easily, they ran for years with minimal maintenance, and perhaps most importantly, they were easy. They had great fuel economy. These qualities really appealed to families that were tired of frequent breakdowns and long gas station lines. Detroit tried to respond with down.
So many of the American automakers, they got a bit too fat and happy, and so they started becoming a bit arrogant and thinking, yeah, you know what, we can cut some corners here and there. People won't notice the difference. And then you had luxury cars that being cranked out of Detroit that wouldn't start, or electrics wouldn't work, things were faulty. It was, a lot of these were self-inflicted wounds.
Sized models, but the effort was pretty superficial. American manufacturers focused on maintaining chrome and plush interiors and a sense of luxury rather than actually rethinking the fundamentals of sedan engineering. It's also worth noting that European automakers refined their own take on the sedan. Brands like BMW and Mercedes-Benz and Volvo, they focused on balance and handling and engineering precision and just rethinking all of the little bits of engineering that make a great car. So
they basically got really autistic about everything to do with the car and made them really, really good.
For example, the BMW 2002 and later 3 Series gave sharp driving dynamics that American car owners were not used to, especially when it came.
I think if you were to look at this particular type of BMW, a classic 3 Series versus a modern one, the interior is a lot more Spartan, not a whole lot of bells and whistles. It was a fairly bare-bones import car. But for some, the price was right, and it was reliable, so a lot of people bought it.
Came to sedans. These cars really were efficient packages, and they set the template for the modern sports sedan as we know it. Mercedes focused on long-term durability and also understated luxury, while Volvo leaned more on safety and practicality. These cars really showed that a sedan
And the
could
niche.
be engaging and sensible, but usable and practical. And they would influence a generation of enthusiasts and really reshape global expectations for what a well-built car should feel like. And all of this helped to shift perception away from viewing American manufacturers as really the leaders and pioneers of the sedan class to falling behind, and all of that happened pretty fast. By the 1980s, the American sedan was really at a crossroad. The oil shocks of the previous decade had reshaped what consumers wanted, and new technologies were beginning to redefine what a family car could be. Things like front-wheel drive, for example, really transformed this segment. Sedans got more interior space, better traction, and better fuel economy. Think cars like the Accord, but also Chrysler's K-Car platform and the
Gosh, remember when... I mean, look
fuel
at that
economy.
shot.
Think cars like the
Remember when the Honda Accord had flip-up headlamps? This was your basic Japanese Econobox back in the day, and you got flip-up headlamps. That is really cool. This was back when the Japanese were the discount models, the cheaper imports. Nowadays, they're quite expensive, especially a Honda Accord. That's like 35, 40 grand if you want any options on it. But back then, these cars were super cheap. And you got things like AM/FM stereo, probably a cassette deck in there, aircon, heater. I even gave you little touches, like what you would get with sports cars, like the flip-up headlamps. Or, take Nissan. And I think it was the 300ZX, or what was sold in Japan as the Fairlady Z. But the Nissan Z was I think I'm remembering this right. Prices on them escape me, but I think you could get one of those for cheaper than you could an American muscle car, or even a European sports car, I think. But that just goes to show you how much things have changed in this world, to where now even Hondas and Acuras, even just a standard level Honda, is just so expensive now. Like 35, close to 40 grand for a Civic hatchback. I was actually looking at one of those when I was pricing out a new car. I actually had to walk away from the idea of getting a Honda. Because I've driven Hondas before, the nice cars. But yeah, the days of affordable Hondas kind of gone. You've really got to buy a bare bones model or be a person of means in order to have a brand new Honda Civic, or really any sort of new car these days. Almost any.
Accord, but also Chrysler's K-Car platform and the Ford Taurus. Now, the Ford Taurus was a milestone in American sedan design at this time. It was aerodynamic, it had modern interior, it looked like a car from the future compared to all the American boxy sedans of the 70s. And I think
I had a neighbor who drove a Taurus estate wagon. They must have kept that car for close to 20, maybe 30 years before it finally just gave out on them, and they didn't make them anymore, so they had to go find something else. That was a sad day. It was a sad day in the neighborhood.
it did give people hope for American sedans going forward, because it did show that Detroit could still innovate when they really wanted to. But even as the Taurus helped to revitalize...
Trouble is, Detroit never really wanted to. They've always had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the future.
Ford's image, foreign competition was quietly building a new standard for reliability and also long-term value. The Honda Accord and Toyota Camry became default family sedans of the American middle class, often built in domestic factories in places like Ohio and Kentucky. These cars offered smooth engines, consistent quality, refinement, and they soon defined what the American family car looked like, even if they weren't designed in Detroit. At the same time, many domestic sedans lost their sense of identity. Brand overlap and cost-cutting turned these once distinct nameplates into just basically indistinguishable fleet cars. The sedan was no longer a statement of aspiration. It had just kind of become ordinary. Basically just basic transportation, and the people that were doing it best were not the companies in America. So up to the point of the new millennium, I think it's fairly safe to say that the groundwork was laid for American sedans to potentially disappear altogether. The American sedan was at a crossroad. Manufacturers like Ford and Chevy, they had to make a decision. They either were going to invest heavily in car development or they had to shift their focuses elsewhere. In many ways, the cultural tide shifted again at this time. Suburban lifestyles, outdoor marketing, and the growing idea of safety through size really made SUVs the next family vehicle of choice. The high driving position felt commanding, and even this promise of all-weather capability appealed to consumers, even if, they never left the pavement.
Yeah, most of them never did. So, wasted their money on off-roading capabilities. The whole thing about wanting to sit up high, that's an obvious inferiority complex. These also aren't safer than saloon cars because they have a tendency to roll over a bit more. Honestly, you are safer in any sort of standard saloon car than you would be in an SUV. But one of the big things, and I don't know if they're going to talk about it in this video, regulations are different, at least in America, for saloon cars versus SUVs. SUVs, they've got more flexibility on what they can do, whereas saloon cars, pretty tight regulations. But those tight regulations have produced some of the safest cars in the world.
Even minivans, which were once the practical successor to the family sedan, they fell out of...
Good God. There's that monstrosity. Don't know if anybody remembers this one, chat, but this is the Pontiac Aztek. It has to be the ugliest looking car ever made, and quite possibly what single-handedly killed Pontiac, and damn near did in General Motors during the great carpocalypse of the late 2000s.
Favor as well, and SUVs and crossovers were taking their place. And so American manufacturers jumped on this. This was really their future. And of course, for automakers, this was all financial. Trucks and SUVs were classified as light trucks, which allowed manufacturers to meet looser fuel economy regulations and also safety regulations. And also, they could earn way more profit margins than they could with sedans. And so the result was that sedans received fewer updates and less marketing support. And people started to view cars as basically SUVs, like a crossover is a car. The term car became synonymous with just vehicle. And I think this helped this shift away from even recognizing the sedan as the car. Like, I would be curious to ask someone born in, let's say, 2015. I mean, if I were to ask my children what a car is or to draw a car, they probably would draw a sedan. But I think, they've been around cars more. But if you ask just a random suburban kid, to draw a car, I think they wouldn't draw a sedan. I think they would probably draw an SUV. The traditional four-door car that had once carried the American family was now seen as just a dying format in this new SUV world. By the 2020s, the American sedan had pretty much all but vanished from all of the mainstream lineups. Ford discontinued the Fusion, the Focus, and the Fiesta. They shifted entirely to trucks and SUVs. GM followed suit, killing the Impala.
I think they've done the same thing worldwide. Can you get a Ford Mondeo in the UK anymore? I don't think you can.
There was the Buick Regal, gone, and then also soon the Malibu. Chrysler.
The Regal was, I believe that was sold as the Vauxhall and Opel Insignia. But it was actually a really well-made car, and it's just a damn shame that it got discontinued.
Chrysler was left with a single holdout, the long-running 300, a design dating back to 2005, and then that ultimately died. And so in the end, Cadillac is the only company making traditional sedans with its CT4 and CT5 models, which are aimed more at the luxury market. And
mostly old boomers that always wanted a Cadillac, or for some of them, that's all they drove was Cadillacs.
Even they are not really all that popular. Like, you don't see them that much. They're barely hanging on. I would not be surprised at all if Cadillac ends the CT within the next 5 to 10 years, despite being pretty cool
Probably.
and pretty competitive in its class to European rivals. People don't
Too
want
expensive, though.
American sedans, and American companies don't want to make them. You know, what is the future of the American sedan? I would say that the Tesla Model S and Model 3 really came to represent the only real example of American sedans becoming popular again in the 21st century, and that's because they represented a more futuristic take on the sedan. Highly efficient as fully electric vehicles, super impressive in terms of safety ratings, and forward thinking in terms of tech, even if I may not love all of that stuff. You know, I hate on Tesla quite a bit, but I do at some point want to make a video about the Model S and its development, because it's not...
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Tesla makes some good cars. They seem to lack soul, especially the more recent design iterations of Tesla models. To me, they look like cheap plastic children's toys. And I just find it difficult to justify paying that much money for something that looks like a child's toy. Great cars. I've been chauffeured around in one before. Don't think I would ever want to own one. At least not now, even though they are pretty cool.
Not only fascinating and somewhat scandalous, the Model S does exist as probably the greatest electric car ever made, and in some ways, the greatest and most influential modern American sedan. It helped revive at least one kind of the American sedan, namely the electric one. So, you know, perhaps the future of American sedans lie in EVs. Again, though, it's hard to not notice that most American manufacturers want to focus not only on SUVs solely, but when it comes to EVs, they just want to make giant electric SUVs, not electric cars per se. So I think it's safe to say that the American sedan...
They want to take what they can focus on and what, for the most part, has been the big sellers, and just zero in on those and make them all electric, which I, myself, being a bit old school, preferring petrol and diesel-powered cars, I find that rather troubling, because the infrastructure is just, it's not there. It's not ready yet. I don't think it's going to be ready for many more years, because, I mean, let's face it, end of the day, it still takes longer to charge up an electric car than it does to fill up a car with a standard internal combustion engine with petrol.
Is basically dead, and I don't think it's coming back anytime soon. Maybe we'll come to our senses at some point. Who knows? Well, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one. Drive safe.
I'll give that one a like. Aside from that, EVs are less fun to drive. Yeah, EVs lack a lot of soul. Like I said, there's just, the soul is not there. Now, you can tune an EV to be a really exciting car. By the way, post in the link in chat to the video if you want to go give it a watch, give it a like, leave a comment. You can tune an electric car to be exciting and to be incredibly sharp in handling and go really, really, really fast. Tesla has proved that with, I think it's the extreme mode or the insanity mode, where it's just all limiters are off and you get full power from the moment you hit the accelerator. Handling is sharpened to the point where it feels like you are in a go-kart. And it is just, that mode in particular is said to be quite fun to drive in, though a bit dangerous too, so don't make a habit of it.